Energy feeds a system based on more consumption, more travel, more stimulation. But what happens when we all just stop? Will a day at the office ever be worth the long, hard commute? Will we be able to justify the weekend city break or overnight business trip? In a world changed by the COVID-19 pandemic, DNV believes it is more important than ever to understand our energy future. This is that story.
A very good afternoon to everyone tuning in today. We are live here in Singapore with DNV, the independent expert in assurance and risk management. I would like to welcome you to our forum on the energy transition in Southeast Asia. My name is Yvonne Chan and I'll be your host and moderator for today. As a driver of innovation and a growing consumer of energy, Southeast Asia's role in this transition cannot be overstated. And so this conference aims to bring together industry experts to discuss the opportunities and challenges in the regional sector and what role Singapore can play as a forward-looking hub developing green technology. But before we begin, I'd like to share some quick tips and tricks to ensure that your participation in today's conference is as seamless as possible. We'd like to encourage our audience to use the chat tab on the right-hand side of your screen to share your thoughts about the forum as well as pose questions to our panelists. They will get to them as soon as they can during the forum, or if not, then they'll answer them after the event today. We'd also like to take a moment to express our gratitude to our supporting partners. And so let's give a big shout out to the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore and the Singapore International Energy Week for their contribution today. If you'd like to find out more about either organization, simply click on the reception tab on the left-hand side of your screen. And if you're afraid about missing, any content today or would like to rewatch some of the panels, fret not, because a copy of today's program will be made available to you on demand right after the event. And now with that out of the way, let's start our conference proper because we have a very exciting agenda lined up for you today. The country chair for Singapore and the regional director for Energy Systems APAC at DNV, Brice De Gallo, will kick off the Singapore Energy Transition Conference with his welcome address. Brice, please.
Thank you, Yvonne. Good afternoon. My name is Brice De Gallo. I'm the regional director for DNV Energy Systems here in Asia Pacific, and I am the country chair for DNV in Singapore. I am delighted to open this event, Singapore Energy Transition Forum, and I'm very pleased to see that so many of you have actually been able to take the time to join us this afternoon. In DNV, our purpose is to safeguard life, property, and the environment, and for more than 150 years, industry and our customers are turning to us as a trusted voice to get answers and insights to their most difficult questions or challenges, usually arising from changing environments. In 150 years, the world has changed, its challenges have changed, but our purpose remains. One of the most important challenge and transformation that we are all facing today is the energy transition. And our vision at DNV is to ensure that we accelerate this transition. Because although we see a clear trend that major changes are foreseen, for example, wind and solar will grow from an 8% share of electricity generation today to more than 60% in 2050, this is just not enough to be able to meet the Paris Agreement. If we are to meet the climate goals, we need to do much more. We expect to undergo multiple energy transitions at different paces, in different forms, in different parts of the world, spanning different technologies and different industries. And the key is to understand the dynamics between the various components of the energy systems, and is to understand how they interlink and interact with one another. So the reason we are hosting this event today is to dive into these complexities, is to understand the perspectives from different stakeholders and to learn from each other. So as I said, this is one of the biggest challenges that we are all facing today, and one that nobody can solve alone. So it is my hope that together, this afternoon, we can demonstrate that decarbonization of energy supplies is not only a great opportunity for value creation, but is also a shared responsibility. So with this, I wish us all a very, very good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that great introduction, Brice. As you've highlighted, with the energy transition globally accelerating and various industries being affected, everyone has a part to play. Not taking a proactive approach in this energy transition puts your company's potential growth at risk. And we couldn't think of a better person to expound on this timely topic than Remy Eriksson, the Group President and CEO of DNV. With more than 24 years with DNV, Remy brings wide management and technical expertise working in oil and gas, maritime and renewable energies industries in Asia, Americas, Middle East and Europe. Joining us right now from Norway to share his views on the energy transition is Remy Eriksson. Remy, it's great to have you join us this afternoon. Can you tell me what's the objective of DNV's energy transition outlook and why was Singapore chosen for the launch?
Certainly. And let me start with the last part of your question. As a nation, Singapore has been at the forefront of the oil trade for decades and is now emerging as the leading LNG hub in Asia, while domestically, Singapore is pursuing an ambitious, clean energy transition. And DNV has been and will continue to be proudly associated with all these developments. Then to the objective. At DNV, some 70% of our business is energy related, and many of our customers are key players in the energy market, either as producers, transporters, or end users. For these companies, the energy transition is a great source of risk and of opportunity. Therefore, 5 years ago, I decided to address this by creating an energy transition research program. And since then, every year we have provided our view on the future of energy. Then what does it cover? Well, our energy transition outlook looks at demand and supply of energy in 10 world regions, including Southeast Asia, and the energy trade between them through to 2050.
So how does your forecast or DNV's forecast differ from other mainstream publications?
Well, our energy transition forecast is what we call our best estimate or our most likely energy future. It is not a backcast. In other words, we do not assume the world will achieve the Paris Agreement or develop in a certain way and then go back from there to where we are today, like most other outlooks do. Instead, the model is what is likely to happen based on historical trends and on models about population and economic growth, policy shifts, technology developments, and behavioral changes. We foresee a very rapid transition over the next 30 years, unlike many others. And by 2050, the world's energy system will be split 50% fossil and 50% renewables. A big change from the current 80-20 split that we have today.
Remy, the Energy Transition Outlook, or ETO for short, also states that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought peak oil forward. Now, what are the implications of that?
Well, before the pandemic, we forecast that oil use globally would peak around 2025. The pandemic has led to a dramatic drop in energy use globally by some 8% last year. And while all energy sources were hard hit, oil was particularly affected owing to much lower levels of air travel and through reduced transport and manufacturing. So looking at the numbers we now say that oil use peaked in 2019. It is a very gentle peak though, and we foresee oil demand recovering this year and then remain fairly stable until around 2028, when it starts to decline noticeably, owing to electrification of road transport.
Well, what about the role of gas, and where does Singapore feature here?
Well, unlike oil, gas will continue to grow according to our forecast, peaking in the mid-2030s. And from that point, it tapers off very gently, such that by 2050, gas will still be the single largest primary energy source. And I believe that is a very important point for the future of Singapore as a global gas hub. The share of seaborne trade in total gas supply has been growing steadily since the emergence of the first LNG carriers in the 1960s. However, even today, less than 15%, that is 15%, of global gas supply is transported at sea. In our outlook, we predict that by 2050, almost half of world's gas production will be transported internationally by ships. So, in contrast to oil, there is a major market upside for Singapore in the coming decades within gas. Then you may ask, what is or why is the staying power of gas? It is because it not only plays an important role as a dispatchable form of electricity generation, but it is also the go-to fuel for demand sectors that are hard to decarbonize. I'm thinking of high heat processes in iron and steel making, in manufacturing, and of course in deep sea shipping.
Certainly a lot of opportunities there. But like you said, if peak oil is behind us, what about global greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes, and emissions fell last year by some 8% as well. And in order for the world to meet the ambitions of the Paris Agreement, the world will have to make that level of emission reductions every year from now and onwards. In other words, 8% this year, and then next year, and so on. But we are not on track to do that. Emissions are rising once again as the world slowly recovers. And we have also seen how difficult it is to cut emissions. Over the last year, it has come at terrible cost in terms of lives and livelihoods. So there really is an enormous challenge ahead to find ways to decarbonize that are both economically sustainable and which make a positive social impact.
Now, on that note of challenges, Remy, is the pace at which we are transitioning to renewable sources of electricity quick enough for us to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement? What sort of hurdles need to be crossed in the meantime?
We know that just transitioning to renewable sources of electricity alone is not enough. Even if all the world's electricity was generated from solar and wind from this moment, we would still not reach the Paris Agreement. We must be looking at the so-called hard-to-abate sectors like heavy, long-distance transport and high heat processes in manufacturing. While electricity can take over some of the work in those sectors, for example, in short sea transport and with heat pumps in manufacturing, and we are really seeing that hydrogen will become a critical energy carrier related to this transition. And at the moment, we don't foresee the hydrogen economy taking off at scale before the mid-2030s, and it would take really bold policy moves to shift the needle on that thing, and the sort of extraordinary policy changes that are impossible for us to forecast.
Yeah, I think we really want policymakers to do more now, but some observers also say that this energy transition is really about the electrification of everything. Remy, what are your thoughts on that?
There are some things you can't electrify, but it is true that we will see a lot more electricity in end use going forward. For example, we predict that by 2040, battery electric vehicles will outnumber fossil fuel cars on roads worldwide. Behind those sort of fundamental end use changes, electricity supply will grow, in fact, more than double from today's levels over the next 30 years. But the key is that electricity not only doubles, more than 60% of the electricity will be produced by renewable sources, mainly wind and solar PV. So the consequences is not only a strong decarbonization of our energy system, but also the avoidance of the enormous losses to heat that occur in fossil-fired electricity generation. For example, EVs are three times more efficient than fossil fueled vehicles. And the key point here is that we will be doing a lot more with a lot less energy in the future, thanks mainly to electricity. We will get twice the economic output in 2050 compared with today for the same amount of energy. So electrification means also great efficiency gains.
I like that point, Remy. Electrification means great efficiency gains. It all sounds very promising. Do you think Singapore is on the right track?
Singapore is very much on trend with these developments we spoke about. Already 95% of electricity supplied in Singapore is generated by gas. But there are decarbonization plans also going forward linked to an ambitious solar build-out and also integration with the wider regional power grid. And that's important.
Absolutely. Now, technology has been a great accelerator and enabler. What sort of role do you think innovation can play in helping the world transition to a cleaner, greener planet that is in line with the Paris Agreement?
I must admit that I'm a technology optimist. And this year in June, we will be publishing a separate companion report looking at some of the technology at the forefront of the transition. There are things like floating offshore wind, new PV technologies, green and novel shipping technologies, and new carbon capture, storage, and use technologies, to name just a few. I would like to add that a lot of technology work is happening in Singapore, and DNV is proudly and closely involved in both the Center of Excellence in Additive Manufacturing and the Center of Excellence in Maritime Decarbonization and Autonomy. In both cases, we aim to combine Singapore-based competence with our business objective to help customers and society at large to tackle major transformations. And with this, I would also like to mention that my colleague, Sverre Alvik, he will later today cover in detail the energy transition in Southeast Asia.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today, Remy, and for setting the scene as to how the energy transition is progressing here in this region. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Well, it's time now for us to hear from our next speaker, whom we're very excited to have with us today. As the authority in the energy market, Jonathan Goh, Director of External Relations at EMA, will talk more about the alternative solutions that Singapore is investing in order to stay at the forefront of the smart energy market within Southeast Asia. Jonathan is also the Singapore leader for the Senior Officials Meeting of Energy at the G20, APEC, and ASEAN. Jonathan also organizes the annual Singapore International Energy Week, one of our supporting partners for today's event. I'd now like to hand the time over to Jonathan, please.
Thank you, Yvonne, and good afternoon to everyone from Singapore. Mr. Remy Erickson, Group President and CEO, DNV, and Brice de Gaulle, the Managing Director of Asia Pacific, DNV. Well, first and very foremost, thank you for inviting this Energy Market Authority of Singapore to share our perspectives here today. My colleagues and myself, we have actually visited your HQ in Europe, had wonderful discussions, and we had long-term cooperation, and so happy to be here to, again, support your event and also share our perspectives. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to share a little bit of the latest energy developments in Singapore, which I think is really, apt for the Energy Transition Conference theme today. Now, Singapore, similar to many countries, faces the energy trilemma of energy security, energy affordability, and also environmental sustainability. Now, our situation is rather unique as Singapore needs to import almost all of our energy needs. As our Minister for Trade and Industry, Mr. Chan Chun Sing, has put it, now if water was our main challenge in the last 50 years, energy would be our main challenge in the next 50 years. So, what has Singapore been doing lately to address this challenge? At the Singapore International Energy Week in 2019, we announced the Singapore Energy Story to put forth our vision for our sustainable energy future. Now, based on our unique landscape, where there are almost no natural resources, We identified 4 supply switches of natural gas, solar energy, regional grids, and low-carbon alternatives. Today, more than 95% of Singapore's electricity supply is generated from natural gas. Now, this will continue to be dominant fuel for power generation, as it takes time to scale up alternative energy options. That said, we're doing more on the solar front. It is our only viable renewable energy, and we are maximizing solar installations across Singapore. The government will take the lead on accelerating solar deployment and work towards potentially achieving 1.5 gigawatt peak by 2025 and also 2 gigawatt peak by 2030. As solar deployment increases, as you will understand, we will probably also need more energy storage system, and we will target to roll out 200 megawatts of energy storage system beyond 2025. The third part of the switch is really talking about regional power grids. This has been an exciting development on this front. And we think that it provides Singapore with the unique opportunity to tap on renewable energy from the region, which will help us advance our energy sustainability goals. The last switch, as mentioned by Remy Erickson, it's all about hydrogen, CCUS, and low-carbon alternatives. And a lot of attention has been paid on this recently. All the supply switches, as I mentioned earlier, will also be supported by energy conservation efforts and also improving energy efficiency across all sectors. So since then, in February this year, 2021, we have announced also the Singapore Green Plan 2030. Now, this is very exciting. It's a whole-of-nation movement to advance Singapore's our national agenda on sustainable development. This is a 10-year sustainable development agenda with firm action plans touching on almost aspects of Singapore's lives. Within the Green Plan specifically, I just want to note the pillar on energy reset. Now, this would see more actions to promote the use of cleaner energy vehicles, as mentioned also earlier, green energy, and it will also help to develop and also accelerate green infrastructure, buildings, and sustainable towns and districts in Singapore. We believe the Singapore Green Plan and the Singapore Energy Story will complement our efforts to achieve a sustainable energy future. To roll out the Green Plan and also to realize this energy story, we firmly believe that we need to engage all stakeholders, and particularly the role of public and private partnership, especially in the areas of R&D of advanced energy technologies, is especially critical. Now, we have long promoted Singapore as a living laboratory, working closely with the industry to test bed and to co-create sustainable solutions, and we will continue to do so. Last year, we announced the $49 million low-carbon energy research funding initiative to support research, development, and demonstration projects in low-carbon energy technologies such as hydrogen and CCUS over the next 5 years. In fact, we have consulted many times with DNV on many energy initiatives, including floating power plants and also offshore LNG terminals. Beyond that, as you see on the screen, we have also worked closely with different companies such as Keppel, SP Group, Shell, to really facilitate many energy technologies in Singapore, whether it's stacking up energy storage on floating platforms, whether it's to also put up more solar panels on some of the gas service stations of Shell across the island. We believe that working closely with consultancy groups, with companies to co-create sustainable energy solutions is key. One of the partners working very closely with DNV over the years is ourselves at Singapore International Energy Week. We believe that this platform, where I think we're able to engage energy leaders and opinion leaders across the region, is important, especially in the world that we face today, where we're unable to perhaps meet face-to-face as we'd like to. hybrid event, an event here today, as we're seeing, will be increasingly important, for us to bring together interesting ideas, innovative solutions. We will also be launching the SEAL theme on 28th of April. So we will also be happy to invite everybody to join us here on 28th April. I think with that, I will end my very brief presentation on the Singapore energy perspectives. I wish you all a very good discussion on the energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. You've truly highlighted how Singapore can indeed be a driver for the energy transition in this region and beyond. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now move on to our panel discussion, our first one for this afternoon. Joining me on stage to discuss the drivers, challenges and opportunities for energy transition in Southeast Asia, we have Sharad Somani, the SPEC Head of Infrastructure at KPMG, Tan Wee Leong, the Senior Director of Energy and Infrastructure at Surbana Jurong, and joining us live all the way from Denmark, Ditlev Engel, the CEO of Energy Systems at DNV. Welcome, gentlemen. So good to have you here with me today. Before we start our discussion, I'd just like to call on our audience to participate in this upcoming conversation as well. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a poll tab. I'd like for you to click on it and answer or input your answer based on the response that you feel most strongly about. Okay, I'm going to read out the question for you now. Many agree that the sector needs more government incentives to accelerate the uptake of alternative energy sources and to mobilize finance away from emission-intensive and non-circular projects. Which method do you think works best? We have 5 options for you. So do input your answers and our panelists will review them as well as weigh in on what they think would be the best option. But for now, let's come back to our panel discussion here on the energy transition in Southeast Asia. And I'd like to direct my first question to Ditlev. Good afternoon in Denmark, Ditlev. As a scene setter, I want you to tell us what are some of the main drivers and the challenges that you've observed for this industry in the ongoing energy transition?
Thank you very much, Iman, and thank you to everybody for joining us here today. Let me start by saying that what we are seeing is that all companies are now taking a much more active stand on their carbon emissions. That means both the way that they consume the energy themselves and also how it impacts their entire supply chain. You could say that everybody now really wants to get their hands around and understand what is their carbon footprint. And I think that's a big change compared to just over the last few years, because people more let it up to the provider of electricity, for instance, to decide how to do that. But now companies are getting much, much more engaged and do expect that people have their, let's say, their carbon footprint 100% under control and can disclose it and explain what they're doing about it. And I think that is quite a different move compared to the past.
Thank you, Ditlev. Guleong, I want to direct this next question to you. Now, what have you done to prepare for this energy transition when it comes to Surbana Jurong's strategy and structure?
I think on our part as Surbana Jurong, one of the key challenges that we actually face is a mindset challenge. We have to start to look at also knowing what our customers are also looking at in terms of how to embrace sustainability, how they look at decarbonization as a topic for their organization, even on a larger front as well. We also look into the mindset change that is required in terms of getting our staff as well as the talents to look into developing and understanding what is clean technology, what clean energies are all about, what is decarbonization all about, and how do we see benefit and bring benefit when we embrace sustainability. Secondly is also in terms of the skill sets required. When we enter into this stage of energy transition, there are new skills required. There are also the need to look at retooling some of our engineers in order to be able to consult better and to be able to understand how clean energy can bring about all these changes. And last but not least, also very important, we believe that industry partnerships are important in order to traverse this energy transition period. Hence, we have embarked on a lot of partnerships within the whole value chain and even across sectors as well in order to bring about change during this energy transition period.
So I'm hearing that it's a bit of a multi-pronged approach where you have a mindset shift that you're engineering right now, reskilling of employees and industry partnerships, which ties into Jonathan's point about, the entire industry having to co-create opportunities to enable this transition to happen a lot faster. Well, thank you, William. Sharat, I want to bring you into the conversation as well. Southeast Asia, we're set to sustain larger economic losses from climate change than other parts of the world. I think it's clearly imperative that companies need to transform now or be transformed. Do you think this is a reality facing many corporates today, Sharat?
Indeed. So your observation is right. I think Southeast Asia has been heavily impacted by the pandemic. I think before the pandemic hit, Southeast Asia as a bloc was probably one of the fastest growing blocs, clocking 5 to 7% kind of growth rates. This year, 2020, we have seen a lot of economies contracting. Having said that, it is predicted that 2021 will be a good growth year for Southeast Asia. Now, when you look at energy transition, I think a confluence of things are happening, which is working in favor of Southeast Asia as a region. The first is, if you look at, because of geopolitical consideration, there's a change in the supply chain, the world supply chain that's happening, where Southeast Asia is expected to play a very, very important role in becoming part of the global supply chain. That is a great business opportunity, which also means that it is a business imperative for companies to transform and be seen to be complying with the climate challenges and commitments that have been made globally by governments as well as corporates. So that's the first big theme. If you become part of the global supply chain, how do you comply with the expectations that your client have? The second thing to look at is what is governments and regulators doing? I think most countries in the region, if you look at it, they have committed to net zero goals within certain time frames. And if you have to comply with those, I think regulators will be looking at a lot of industries to be compliant with helping those achieve those goals. So that's the second aspect. Third aspect is the investors and the stakeholders. It is very clear that the investment dollar is going towards companies which are seen to be honoring the energy transition and complying with the energy commitments or the climate commitments. So I think if you look at these three things, we are probably in the best situation to leverage the opportunity and move forward.
So there's really no better time than now, right, to take action on this. Thank you, Sharat. I want to move on now to talk about some of the market opportunities for the energy transition in Southeast Asia. As Remy pointed out earlier, this region, the energy consumption is set to grow by 50% by the time we reach 2050. So while this presents many challenges, there are opportunities as well. Ditlev, tell us, what do you see as the most promising alternative energy that we should capitalize on here?
Well, I think was mentioned by Remy as well. We will see a massive uptake of wind and solar, for instance. But I think the real opportunity comes to the whole integration thinking which is required. And let me just explain what I mean by that. We are, during the COVID-19, we saw world energy demand go down by about 8%. And that is, of course, on a very sad background. And then we stopped flying, we stopped driving our cars, etc. But when we look at what is required of us as a world, we need to do that every single year going forward. And I think we all look very much forward to that the COVID-19 is over so we can start to get some of our lives back again. But we have to remember then at the same time, we have to continue the 8% reduction every single year. So when you sit down and think about this, I think it's very important to say we need to focus on two things. We need to focus on what we're going to scale up, like wind and solar, battery storage, but we also need to look at what do we need to scale down. And we need to make a plan for that. And therefore, I have to say that for us in Energy Systems at DNV, we are working on all of the above, scaling up, scaling down, and also integrating systems, because there will be a lot of money already invested that people are saying, what are we going to do with that? How can we change, for instance, our pipelines going forward? Can we use them for hydrogen, etc.? So it's really having a 360-degree view on a country level and a company level, exactly how can we best do that? It is a massive task, and as you said, Yvonne, it's a great opportunity, but it also does require, to what was mentioned, a mindset shift of how we're going to address it all the time, and not just say, oh, okay, I've done that, so all is good. No, this is going to be a real constant journey that we need to keep on measuring all the time, otherwise we're not going to get there. And I think that we have shown that if we set our hearts and minds to something, we can really make it happen. And on this one, I have to say I was very encouraged to see what presented by just before the Singapore plan, because this is exactly what is needed, is a plan that how we're going to get there, and then of course execute it. So I think that's very encouraging, and hopefully other countries in Southeast Asia can get inspiration and work together with Singapore, not just in Singapore, but also around in the region, of how to make this uptake.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's about choosing which energy sources to scale up and scale down. And it's not just challenging, but I think it's a very tough choice and tough task as well. So hopefully you have someone capable too to steer this change. Now, there are also significant wind projects, I'm hearing, in the pipeline in Vietnam. So how can local investors embark on these opportunities, Sharad?
Okay, so Vietnam has been a great success story, I must say, in the last 2 years. In fact, Vietnam was probably one of the very few economies that did not contract in 2020, right? It still showed a positive economic growth. And over the last 2 years, we have seen Vietnam add close to 4.5 gigawatts of solar itself. And today they have an aggregate solar capacity of close to 16 gigawatts. So it's quite a success story as a country in terms of renewable energy. Looking at wind, if you look at the pipeline in Vietnam, I think we are looking at a pipeline of around 16 to 18 gigawatts of wind project. Now the real question is, where will the financing come from? I think bulk of the solar projects got funded primarily through local financing. Wind projects are a little more complex than solar projects. I think we have seen a lot of success stories in Taiwan, for example, and this would entail that there is a body of knowledge available in terms of international financial community which can come and invest in wind projects. The question is, are we able to offer them bankable contracts? And this is where the crux of the matter would be, and whether Vietnam can be successful in offering contracts that stand the scrutiny of international investors and attract the international investors to that market will be the true test. Our belief is for this program to be successful and Vietnam to benefit from this energy transition, I think they will have to ensure that they offer contracts which are bankable, they attract the global investment community. At the same time, the local community will also get involved in projects based on their solar experience. But a combination of international community and local community coming together to make projects happen will be very, very powerful.
I just want you to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing here. You know, you talk about for this sort of project to take off, Vietnam would have to come up with more bankable contracts, international local communities coming together. What sort of time frame are we looking at for that to happen?
So it actually very fast. In fact, some of the timelines for implementing wind are quite immediate. My sense is it's not that you have to reinvent the wheel. It's not that Vietnam doesn't know what a bankable contract looks like. What is, I guess, is important is to ensure that there's a realization that to achieve these big targets, we have to have combination of both local and international community. And that is what will lead to the success of this program. It can be very fast.
It's about taking action now, isn't it? Yep. Thanks, Sharad. Coming back to you, William. Singapore, we have been very responsive in the global fight against climate change. You know, we may be very resource constrained, but we have been at the forefront of technological developments. We make use of energy efficient buildings. We're also powering our smart grids with renewable resources. What other opportunities are there in this space in ASEAN?
In fact, there are quite a significant amount of opportunities. From the technology front, if we look at decarbonizations, we look at carbon capture technologies, that is already clear and present today. And there are a lot of interested technology that are in the market. But of course, the challenge lies in how do we integrate these technologies into existing productions or into existing plants. And I think that is a question that needs to be answered in time to come and to make it commercially viable. There is also a need to look into carbon utilization, especially in Singapore, where we are space constrained. So while we capture the carbon, we need to utilize it as fast as possible and as most efficiently as possible. So these are two areas. And third area is into possibly hydrogen. There are a lot of excitement in terms of looking at hydrogen technologies, whether in fuel cells or in generating hydrogen and even importing of hydrogen. I think these are areas where there are technologies available, At the same time, there needs to be understanding of the context of Singapore. Every single geography, every location, every project have its own context. And when we are dealing with new energies, we need to look into how then do we fit that into those contexts. I think that's where the expertise of various industry partners, be it consulting, engineering, policy-wise, and even operations-wise, must come together to make it happen.
Sounds like a pretty tall order, getting all these various facets, clicking together and just getting that wheel churning as well, but I'm sure it can be done. I want to move on now to that poll question. Quick shout out to our audience. I hope you've had a chance to input your answers. Okay, so let's bring up our poll results right now. I'm very curious to see what most of you have chosen. So the question is, once again, the sector needs government incentives to accelerate the uptake of alternative energy sources and to mobilize finance away from carbon emission-intensive and non-circular projects. And it seems like the one with 24 votes, or the most votes. Wait, no, actually, the second option, option B, says provide economic signals such as price incentives to reduce carbon-intensive behaviors, that is higher carbon pricing, should be key and putting into getting those government incentives to work. The second one, we've got a very close tie. Restrict the use of inefficient or polluting products. So kind of what Dilip said earlier, about scaling down the kind of energy sources that you don't need. You could do that, restrict the use of inefficient products by increasing taxes. Hardly any, well, we have like a couple of votes for option C, huge increase in the capacity of grid infrastructure. D and E, renewable technology rapidly deployed at scale, and a significant investment in regulatory structure with long-term visibility. Those two are also at quite a close tie, but A and B, options A and B, especially B, higher carbon pricing seems to be the one that most people are choosing today. I'd love for my panelists to weigh in on this. Ditlev, what do you think?
I think people have voted correctly, and let me just elaborate on that. We are, as was mentioned by Remy, very technology optimistic, but these are long-term projects, so they need to understand what is the regulatory framework on which you invest into. And by having a higher carbon price, and not one that you keep on changing, but making a long-term view so the investors know exactly what they're looking into, is probably the questions we get most today. And that means the regulatory uncertainty, including the carbon pricing, is a very, very important enabler for deployment of the technology. I've been involved with renewable energy over the last 15 years, and I can't remember in the beginning how many questions I got about the quality of the, let's say, the technology. Those questions we don't get anymore. Now it's a question of what is the regulatory framework, and then how we're going to scale it up. So I would say higher carbon pricing and then working at scale are two very, very important enablers, because we need to scale up much faster. And this is, again, a very key point for the transition.
So higher carbon pricing and scaling up at a much faster speed. Thank you, Ditlev. Sharat, let's have you weigh in on this too.
Yeah, I think I agree with Ditlev. I think with so many things in flux in the energy transition, one certainty on regulatory matters would be quite useful for the investors. And I think regulators like EMA are doing a good job of, in fact, giving a roadmap of how the energy industry is going to evolve. So that clearly is one of the key things that an investor will look at when they look at investing in a particular jurisdiction. I would also take this advice with caution on carbon pricing, because a lot of implications on the economic activity has to be evaluated. A calibrated approach will be very, very important. I'm not surprised with the outcome of the poll, because to certain degree, all these parameters will help you move in that direction. It cannot be one solution.
That's right.
Having said that, I think a carrot and stick approach has been implemented by a number of countries, including Singapore. We do have a carbon tax in Singapore where the roadmap has been laid. We have energy efficiency, energy conservation being encouraged for companies. So a number of things are being done. But I would say a calibrated approach that doesn't impact the industry immediately but achieves the long-term objectives will be very, very powerful.
So you're in it for the long-term, calibrated approach. Thanks, Sharad. William.
I think on the topic of scaling up that Ditlev mentioned earlier, it is very important. However, one aspect to take into account is how technology can be implemented and suited to the current context in order to scale up. efficiently. I think cost is always a concern for any businesses.
Yes.
So we have to ensure that when we look into adopting any of such technologies in terms of carbon capture or even utilization, we are able to help the businesses as well to operate still efficiently and hopefully profitably when we are scaling up. But adoption of such technology and the ability to provide a location for them to even test bed and to scale it up eventually into a commercially viable scenario will be essential. And that is something I truly believe needs to be done fast. And in order for us to potentially meet any climate agreement challenges.
I'm hearing a lot today from our panelists that the importance of speed, right? Things that should have happened yesterday really needs to happen now. Since you're still on the spotlight, Wee Leong, I want to quickly ask you, financiers are now increasingly evaluating their projects from an environmental perspective, right? Based on a carbon footprint, whether it's low or high. What does this mean for your business?
It essentially means you need to embrace sustainability and treat it as a core in all our design or our project delivery. So this is essential, and we are doing that today. So sustainability is at the heart of all our projects today. And in order for us to deliver sustainable projects moving forward, it's important that we ensure that our customers understand what the metrics are when we're talking about sustainability. Two, also how our deliveries, including our engineers and our project managers, understand in terms of delivering a sustainable project. So all this needs to come together in order to ensure that projects can be sustainable in the long run.
Thanks, Wee Leong. I want to go to our Q&A right now because we have an interesting comment here by one of our guests today. Thank you. And it says, we only have a small window left to avoid irreversible non-linear feedback mechanisms kicking in. Is this a concern you share, and how small is this window? Ditlev, would you like to take this one on?
Well, I think as I said earlier, we need to reduce on a global scale 8% every year. And I would say that is a very tight window. And therefore, I think it's also important to say that there are some sectors that are easier to change than others, and some are very hard. Airlines, for instance, shipping, it will take longer. And therefore, I think it's very important that we differentiate about what we can do immediately for some and where we need to spend more time and investment for others, and have that differentiated view in order to get there. But the key point is really to keep on ensuring that we keep bringing down the emission levels all the time. And this cannot happen on a standalone basis. It needs to happen in very close public-private partnerships. But as long as we all focused on this, I think that is the absolute key. And I know that there are many companies already that are, for instance, we talked about carbon price before, are already putting it into their investment plans, that they say the price of carbon will go up. So we are already now taking it into account, even though it hasn't happened. So people are already building in a lot of assumptions of what they need to think about and be ready for in order to make sure they can get to the target where they want to go. So I think that's very, very important. And the window is, or the opportunity is really very, very narrow. So we need to move extremely fast.
Thank you, Ditlev. We're going to take one more question from the floor, just very quickly. With natural gas becoming the largest energy source globally, much more needs to be done to reduce emissions from flaring, venting, and leaks. Why are these emissions not reducing despite small-scale gas monetization technologies available? Sharat, would you like to take this one on?
Well, it's a bit of a technical question for me, so I would probably defer it to
Ditlev? Thanks, Sharat. Ditlev, do you think this is more one for you?
I'm not the exact expert of what has happened here, but it just again shows the complexity in this. And let me just also say that I think when we talk about the role of gas, it's important to say that the first thing that we really need to focus on is how to scale down our consumption of coal. Addressing the coal challenge is probably the most essential and immediate one that we need to get our hands around, how to displace coal as soon as we possibly can. And then there actually gas is then a better alternative to switch to until you can get to, let's say, a full renewable solution.
Thank you, Ditlev. Now we're almost out of time, so I'd just like a quick one-liner from each of my panelists today, Sharad, Ditlev, and Wee Leong. You know, there are obviously, from our sharing today, substantial investment opportunities to be reaped by investing in new generation renewables. From a longer-term perspective, what do you think our investors, corporates, and business owners need to take note of before they embark on this journey? Or if they haven't, before they accelerate their participation in this? Let's start with you, Wee Leong.
From my perspective, I think what is important is that investors need to understand. They need to understand what is sustainability and what the benefits they're going to reap out of it in order when they put in any investments on such projects. So that is the core in my understanding in terms of looking at such sustainable projects moving forward.
Thanks, Wee Leong.
I would say that I think the investment community is broadly aligned with the agenda. I would say all the institutional capital of $71 trillion is focusing on green capital. My sense is two things. One is form over substance. I think it's no longer a tick box exercise. Companies have to realize that this is indeed, you have to follow this in spirit to include in your business plan. Second thing is I think it requires a fair bit of commitment from boards and the chief executives of the company to ensure that this is top of the agenda to make it happen, because this is indeed a business imperative as we discussed.
Business imperative. Thank you, Sharad. Ditlev, some concluding remarks from you, please.
No, I think a lot of good things have already been said. I will only say, as I said in my opening remarks, the focus on the carbon footprint of any organization is also something now that the investors are paying much closer attention to, also looking at the company as such who are maybe not part of the energy transition. So we all need to build this in, as was mentioned, into our business plans. And we all need to make sure that we also going to disclose it, because it will be, I think, a requirement very soon from many countries and regulators on the financial side as well to disclose that in your annual reports, et cetera, et cetera. So getting your hands around your carbon footprint would be my best advice to anybody tuning in here today, irrespective of what business you're in. And then I think also have that mind shift that is required in order to think differently about this challenge than maybe people have done in the past. And I think that would be my best advice today.
Thank you so much, Ditlev, Wee Leong, and Sharad for your wonderful insights. You know, despite CO2 emissions having peaked and increased deployment of renewables, we still need to move a lot faster in order to reach the Paris Agreement goals. You know, having a successful transition is huge, and we need to act now. What do we need? We need stronger policies, governments committing to greener economic stimulus packages, higher carbon pricing, and supporting regulations. Given that the actions taken today will have a disproportionately larger impact than the actions taken in 5 to 10 years' time, companies and corporates, like my guests have shared today, with the foresight and the resources to act now, also stand to benefit from higher valuations and growth. So there's some food for thought for you there. Thank you, guys. Now, here at DNV, we aim to share our expert knowledge with the industry and stakeholders, and therefore we're dedicated to exploring the global energy future with our annual energy transition report, as Remy had pointed out earlier. Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Xavier Elveric, the Director of the Energy Transitions Program at DNV, to shed more light on the energy transition progress in Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Yvonne, for the introduction. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to give you this summary of the Southeast Asia energy transition findings as DNV sees them. I wish I was there in Singapore together with you. I used to work for DNV in Singapore some years back. I'll start with introducing the highlights of the transition, and I'll get back to all these over the coming 10 minutes. As in all other regions, the ongoing energy transition will bring large changes to the Southeast Asian energy system. A major force in here is that electricity production will more than triple, with solar PV and natural gas being the leading sources. Economic growth is a key priority for the region. And we see technology improvements rather than strong energy policies will dominate the transition. The emissions in 2050 will be about equal to the present level, with first the growth and then a decline. And Southeast Asian CO2 emissions in mid-century will be a little higher than world average. The world only has one energy system, and everything is connected to everything. The economic developments are connected. The technology developments are connected. Even the energy policies are connected. DNV has designed an advanced system dynamic energy transition model, which is looking into all sources of energy demand and energy supply, and the transportation and transformation of energy that happens between these sources. Being global, the energy transition still takes place in very different forms in the different regions and countries. And even within the Southeast Asian region, there is huge differences between, for example, the energy transition in Singapore and the one in Cambodia. And we have Southeast Asia as a separate region in our forecast, stretching from Myanmar in the north to Papua New Guinea in the south, and includes almost 700 million people. The results I will show you now is the sum and the average, a weighted average of these countries. So let us look into the results, and let us start with primary energy. The primary energy consumption today in Southeast Asia is fossil fuel dominated, with oil being the largest energy source. Oil will continue to grow for another 10 to 15 years and then slowly decline towards mid-century. Natural gas, on the other hand, will continue to grow all the way to 2050, but it's not competing with oil. Oil is mainly used in the transport sector, gas is mainly used for power generation and in industry. Many of the countries in the region are using large shares of coal in the power production and industry. And the growth of the coal will continue only for around 5 more years and then level off, as it's outcompeted by natural gas and later also by solar PV and wind. But through to mid-century, fossil fuel dominance in the region will remain strong, around 64% of energy use in 2050. In the coming decades, we will see solar PV first and later also wind starting to grow. It grows from a low base, but it does constitute a considerable share of the region's energy use in mid-century. And albeit it looks relatively small on this chart, that has to do with the way we count the primary energy. Because it's much more efficient, its share of final energy use is much bigger. The energy transition is a lot about electrification, and so also in Southeast Asia. Today, electricity in the region is dominated by coal and gas and some hydropower. But already today, we see that solar PV and wind is able to compete for new energy. And in a 10 years' time, it's likely not only to be cheaper, to be the cheapest form of new energy, but also to be cheaper than operating the existing coal and gas plants. And the majority of the growth is taken by renewables, including hydropower, and a sizable share of wind, including offshore wind. But the big winner here is solar PV. And solar PV and wind, being variable renewables, put some new requirements to the energy system. And we do need both storage and connectivity and demand response to cater for a very different electricity system than today. But first and foremost, you should remember here that the electricity system is electrifying in all sectors. Then hydrogen is also a very hot topic today, and we need to talk a little bit about that. The hydrogen transition is coming, but it's coming later than what we would like. But hydrogen is expensive and to a large extent also inefficient today. We will see hydrogen use coming in the road transport sector for trucking, but we don't think it will be able to compete for passenger vehicles. We will see hydrogen use coming in shipping, but probably or more likely in the form of ammonia And we will see hydrogen use, but not until the 2040s, coming in the manufacturing sector, where it's replacing coal in heavy industry like iron and steel making. Initially, hydrogen production is dominated by blue hydrogen, coming from natural gas with steam methane reforming and carbon capture and storage on that. Later, we will see green hydrogen playing a more prominent role, coming from variable renewables. We will see CCS, carbon capture and storage, growing in the region, but the main growth will only happen in the 2040s. And by mid-century, we expect almost 100 million tons to be captured by CCS in the region, by then representing around 5% of all emissions. To do this, we expect a regional carbon price growing from a negligible level today to around $15 per ton CO2 in 2030 and $40 per ton CO2 in 2050. A first step towards carbon pricing would be to remove the fossil fuel subsidies that exists in several countries in the region. Then let's end this off by talking a little bit about emissions. We forecast Southeast Asian CO2 emissions to continue to grow until mid-30s and then decline back to a level about equal to the present emissions in mid-century. Emissions from transport, buildings, and manufacturing will all follow the same patterns. In 2050, the average regional emissions will be 2.2 ton per person, and that is a little higher than the global average, again owing to a remaining high fossil fuel share, including coal use. Then let me end off by summarizing. As in all other regions, the Southeast Asian energy system will see a rapid transformation in the coming decades. And the most prominent change will be in electrification, which will more than triple. With economic growth being a key goal in the region, fossil fuel use will remain high. Technology improvement is the major force behind the transition, but stronger energy policies would be needed if we were to further reduce emissions beyond what we see here in this illustration, and reduce emissions down to a level that will be in line with Paris Agreement targets. And with that, I will thank you for the attention and wish you good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much for the enriching report, Savari. To follow up on that insightful session, I'd like to welcome my panel two to join me on stage to discuss green technology and Singapore's contribution to the energy transition. So let's welcome Simon Quick, the Head of Research and Development at Sembcorp Marine, Cristina Sáenz de Santa Maria, the Maritime Regional Manager for Southeast Asia, Pacific and India at DNV, and Loic Villasel, the Director at NG Lab. Once again, before I kickstart this awesome discussion, I want to get our panelists to join me in this conversation. So do go to the right-hand side of your screen. There is a poll tab there. Click on it. We have another question for you, and let me read it out. Which developing technology will enable Singapore to contribute the most to the regional energy transition by 2030? We have 6 options for you, so choose the option that you feel most strongly about, and we will get our panelists to weigh in on some of these answers a little later. So your time starts now. Okay, let's come back to our discussion. Role of Singapore. Despite Singapore's really small size, we are known as a hub for innovation, right? And even though we are restrained by our resources and have very limited options when it comes to alternative sources of energy, Singapore still aims to deploy enough solar power by 2030. And there are also initiatives to promote Singapore as a hub for carbon trading and carbon pricing. So given that context, how else do you think Singapore's role can be scaled up or expanded? I'd like to start with you first, Loic.
Thank you, Yvonne. Yeah, I believe indeed Singapore is creating all the conditions to be a living lab for green emerging technologies and more specifically for future cities. Thanks to the Green Plan, clear public targets, regulatory incentives which are very favorable, a very attractive ecosystem. with recognized universities and lots of companies, like-minded companies we can partner with. What I think is, on top of it, Singapore could take advantage of the space constraints of the city and the tropical conditions. I explain a bit more.
Yep.
I think, in a way, Singapore is facing today space constraints as a city that more and more cities will face in the future. In a world where the population is increasing very fast and moving to cities, so Singapore can pave the way for the development of innovative solutions answering to these constraints. And when it comes to tropical conditions, and especially when you are in charge of an R&D center, I can tell you that it's more effective to develop new technologies in tropical countries than in Europe, for instance, because if your new technologies work in Singapore, you can make sure they will work everywhere in the world, which is not true the other way around.
Oh, so Singapore could be used as a best-in-class example.
Exactly.
We may be resource constrained, but we are pretty resourceful.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Loic. Christina, let's have you weigh in on this as well.
Yes, so I think it's diversity. I mean, you just need to look at this panel and this conference, the panelists and speakers, right? It's so multinational, so cross-sector. So I think leveraging on that collaborative approach with a clear government strategy is one of the keys for Singapore's success. And I think that will make the country and the companies that operate in the country being able to significantly contribute to that energy transition. There is a need for expertise in digital technology, maritime, energy, logistics, consulting, financing, and so on. And we have it all here. So we're just putting all together, developing technologies and services, piloting, scaling up, and exporting those. I think that we will, make a difference and make that shift towards lower and or zero energy systems.
Yeah, it's really about capitalizing on the expertise that's already available. So cross-sector collaboration, like you said. Thank you, Christina. Simon.
Hi. Singapore is better known to be a world center for building offshore oil rig, and we deliver some 70% of offshore drilling and production assets over the last 2 decades. But I'm also pleased to share that increasingly we are also being seen as innovation and engineering centers, developing sustainable product solutions for future ships, especially in line with the decarbonization. This transition to decarbonization actually started quite way back in 2015 when we identified LNG, offshore wind, and digitalization as a key thrust in our industry transformation plan. Soon after that, I think over the last few years, we have invested a lot by the shipyard in design capability. We have also seen the research community has built up the infrastructure, including the readiness of the offshore testing tank. Classification, major classification of the world, all choosing Singapore as a base for technology development, at the same time also plan approval. That helps a lot. So Singapore increasingly now become excellent hubs for innovation, design, variations, certification, and construction of vessels. So it's a one-stop shop. I'm confident that with the transition into decarbonization, we can continue to play this pivoting role as a major world marine and offshore engineering centers decarbonize.
Yeah, there's so much potential there, and I love your phrase of calling Singapore a one-stop shop for this energy transition, hopefully, yeah? Thank you, Simon. Now, I want to move on to our poll question. Let me read it out. Now, I do hope you had your chance to input your answers. So, which developing technology will enable Singapore to contribute the most to the regional energy transition by 2030? And I'm seeing here, okay, we have a majority, almost 30% voting for solar, including floating. Onshore wind, just only 1. Offshore wind, 6 votes. Hydrogen and ammonia, at 25.6%. Carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS, 13.2%. And liquefied natural gas as a fuel, or LNG. Okay, so we've got ammonia and LNG coming in at the same, 25.6%. Most promising alternative source, solar at 30%. Let's have our guests weigh in on this.
Lloyd, what do you think? Which would you choose as the most promising alternative source of energy? Would you agree with our audience today? 30% goes to solar. But it's, you know, hydrogen and ammonia and liquefied natural gas is a pretty close fight at 25% each.
I like the idea of the integration. I think the solution is a mix of all these solutions, as it has been raised a bit earlier today.
Yes.
Speaking about solar, I think definitely the solar will play a role, will play its part, and more specifically to answer with innovative solutions adapted to the space constraints once again. So rooftop PV, obviously, but lightweight PV, organic PV to cover as many surfaces as possible. Bifacial PV to increase the energy yield of the PV itself. And probably lots of other innovative modules for different applications, like agri-PV applications, I think, can be one of them.
Yeah. Many
options. I'm pretty sure, I mean, I think we all agree that in order to make it happen by 2030, we really need to make a lot of efforts to speak about hydrogen as a game changer. I'm not sure there will be massive deployment of hydrogen-based solutions at that time, but I will pick this one as well.
So solar, so option A and option D.
Speaking about hydrogen, so basically there will be some lots of issues to deal with, especially in importation issues. But I mean, as you know, hydrogen is enjoying a very exciting momentum at this time, with more and more policies, more and more projects increasing very fast everywhere in the world, and lots of applications for hydrogen, as you know, for to decarbonize the industry, the mobility, to step by step replace diesel and natural gas in pipelines, in CCGT, in gensets, in buildings, a bit everywhere. So I will pick this one, and maybe for another reason as well, because at NG Lab Singapore we have our own testing platform, and we have a full hydrogen chain at Semakau Island. So I might speak a bit more about it later today, but what I mean is that we are ready to start to demonstrate and test and prepare the deployment of these hydrogen technologies.
Exciting, exciting times ahead. Christina, your views on the most promising alternative energy source?
Yes, so according to DNV's views, there's actually no silver bullet. It's a combination, it's an energy mix, both when we are talking about power generation for the grid and also from the maritime side when talking about ship fuels. But if we first go to the power generation for the region, we would say it's solar, is natural gas, is wind, and is hydropower, as my colleague Sverre has mentioned before. And when it comes to maritime and the ship fuels, I would say, of course, LNG is it's a transition fuel which is really important and really being used right now. And in the future, we will see more ammonia, biomethanol, and also hydrogen as building block for many more carbon neutral fuels, which will definitely get an uptake in the future.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Simon, what do you think Singapore can contribute the most to this energy transition? Which sort of energy?
I'm not surprised that solar came out top in the survey.
30%.
But for Singapore, I think it's true.
Yeah.
We can't have offshore wind because lack of sea space and land space. At the same time, we lack the wind resources to be able to generate effectively. I also agree with Christina that it will be a combination of solutions for the world, depending on location. Say, for example, further north in the Mekong River region, hydro is the solution for renewable. But for today's sharing, I come from a background of the marine offshore engineering industry, where I can contribute more to the maritime decarbonizations. And I think in terms of future ships, there are a few possible options. We heard about the electrification earlier on.
Yes.
And that will be certainly an easy to implement solution tap from the grids for the near shore and harbor application. So that will be one aspect. And Sembcorp Marine is now actually building 3 zero emission ferry in our Singapore facility. For further from the harbour for long haul, then we need to have a fuel that are able to be stored and take the vessel further away. So ammonia hydrogen will provide that potential, but it take some developmental effort for the entire industry to look at. For ammonia, we need to address the issue of safety because the gas is toxic, more toxic than LNG, and also the smell is terrible. That is one area that we need to address. For hydrogen is light, highly flammable, very low temperatures. Those are technical challenges that we need to overcome again. Otherwise, it can be a big safety issue as well. So for those two areas, then Sembcorp Marine have started evolving in the design of hydrogen fuel cell vessel for European sectors. Also, I think earlier on when we hear from the Energy Management Authority presentation, we talk about Singapore energy needs ground based on the LNG as a base source. I believe that the LNG is here to stay for a while more. And to be able to be a sustainable fuel, we need to decarbonize it, and carbon capture can be one good coupling. So the development of carbon capture in the utility scale or in the vessel mobile vessel installation are the two possible developments that we need to look at where we can contribute to see how do we make LNG continue to be available, cheap, and also decarbonized fuel in longer term future.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that illustration, Simon. You actually answered my next question because I was going to find out from you, what is Sembcorp Marine doing on the ammonia and hydrogen front? So you've already given me quite a clear illustration there, so thank you so much. I just want to quickly go to our Q&A because we have some pressing questions coming up. This one from one of our guests. Carbon tax or carbon credit for the maritime sector, generally speaking, would that help to accelerate the uptake of alternative fuels? So perhaps we direct this question to Christina.
Yeah, I think it would, but what is important is that we create a level playing field and that we don't penalize those that are taking actions now, in solutions that may not be fully ready. So I think it's again about a combination of having a level playing field, and that therefore we believe that also a solid regulatory framework needs to be in place so that every piece of the puzzle can fit in.
Thanks, Christina. Now, one of our guests' comments say there isn't enough venture capital for new technologies in Southeast Asia. What is your take on that, Loic? Do you think there's enough venture capital for new technologies? I understand at NG Lab you are also developing new technologies to decarbonize the energy sector here.
Yeah.
Any comments?
Just on the venture capital?
And then what else is NG Lab doing on that front?
Okay, yeah, I can speak indeed of our testing platform located at Semakau landfill. We started to build this testing platform back in 2016 in partnership with the Nanyang Technological University, and it was inaugurated last November. So I don't know if you had the chance to go there, but what you can find on the platform is wind turbine, PV panels, a battery, a full hydrogen chain with electrolyzer, hydrogen storage, fuel cell, hydrogen refueling station, hydrogen vehicle, and the full suite of management system in order to monitor and optimize the use of these different equipment all together. And so after 4 years of construction, we are entering in the testing phase now, which is much more exciting. And we are happy, definitely, to welcome new pilots, new technologies, new partners on site to be part of this living lab. And that's where, in a way, you can do the link with your question. I mean,
more venture capital that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Was it tough though, getting all that capital to come in initially?
What do you think was some of the biggest challenges, limiting the growth of the green technology market here in Singapore?
I think the main challenges, I mean, people are interested by green technologies, right? But I think they will be even more interested if it's cheap enough. And that's where they will be ready to buy them. And what I see two main challenges. The first one is to better foster collaboration between the different players of the local ecosystem. We need to develop more and more complex solutions, right, today.
Yeah.
And for that, we need to complement the skills of each other. We cannot find a solution on our own. And the second challenge, I think, is communication. I think there are already quite a lot of mature green emerging technologies on the market, but it's very important to communicate on it and kind of bring awareness to people to enhance adoption and promote utilization.
Yeah. Thank you, Loic. Simon, I see you nodding vigorously to what Loic was saying, talking about the prohibitive costs. Maybe it's about making green technology a little bit cheaper. Maybe you'd like to chime in here as well. What do you think? Some of the biggest challenges limiting the growth of the green technology market here in Southeast Asia?
I was in a similar platforms conference last week, and I hear from many experts who share views about the future decarbonization. And one of the common themes came from a few panel speakers where technology is not the key big challenge. Technology is here. And also in terms of the demand and markets, we can see that the investment projections are going very strong. So these are the two factors I think is not an issue. However, the key challenge for us in developing solutions as technologies or as engineers is that each of these future fuel has different challenges. And today we are not clear which is the clear pathway. So we are sort of distracted by have to do quite a few different research concurrently, and that costs money and times. I give you an example of, say, for the hydrogen, we talk about safety. We talk about highly explosive gas. And also for hydrogen, the key is about whether or not the hydrogen is green or blue, meaning you need renewable to actually produce a hydrogen. And this takes time. So time is another second issue for building up the green energy. For ammonia, we're talking about the health issue, the smell, the toxicity, and then in terms of, say, for example, adoptions of electrification, which I mentioned earlier on, the key challenge is about the cost of battery. Yeah. Also, many people also probably omitted one very important fact.
Which one?
When they discuss about the renewable,
Yeah.
is that they look at one single segment of the solution and say that is renewable. We need to look at secondarity, the whole chain. Whether or not the battery, how do you dispose it? We take biofuel, whether the biofuel comes from palm oil, that destruct the wetland and also the biodiversity. When I take from hydro, the upstream, downstream diversity of nature. All these are very, very important issue that the world need to consider. Don't solve one problem, create another big problem for the world. And wind is technically matured on land and also safe. It has also caused problem for migrating birds in a pathway. So there's no one single solution that is obvious to us now. I think we need to concurrently work on solving all these issues.
Yeah.
At some point in time, I think we will converge. The world will have consensus, and then I think that will be the time when the energy transition will be disrupted.
So it'll be like a tipping point.
A tipping over point.
Yeah, the tipping point, right?
Yes.
And as Christina said, there is no silver bullet for this. I want to really just capitalize on the fact that I have two maritime experts with me today, and I want to ask, what other opportunities are there for the maritime sector in this energy transition? Are we likely to see, an increase in shipping services for offshore renewables, or maybe the installation of more specialized ports and terminals? Christina, do you foresee this happening in the next few years?
Absolutely. So, I mean, despite the constraints that Singapore has because of the lack of seashore, right? But it can still develop and export the technology to other countries in the region, like Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, right? But also around the offshore wind, I mean, when it comes to floating, I mean, there is a lot of expertise needed. These are harsh environments that we are talking about, deep waters, changing soils for the turbines to be anchored and moored, right? And there is a need for technology assurance providers, right? Like us, actually, that we have over a couple of decades of experience, and we actually have certified 80% of the offshore farms. And when it comes to bottom fixed wind farms, I mean, there are plans that they will reach around 250 meters of diameter and produce 20 megawatts annually. I mean, imagine some of the Singapore skyscrapers just rotating along their axis. That's quite a piece of engineering, right? So everything needs to go right. So in both terms, I think the maritime and offshore oil and gas industry can contribute in terms of the safety aspect, because we need to make sure that whatever we put on and test, it goes well. Otherwise, we will lose the public trust and confidence, and that actually will backfire us. And then as a last point, there will be a whole ecosystem around these offshore wind farms, right, of offshore wind installation vessels, cruise support vessels, offshore vessels, and the whole subsea installation. So that will definitely create opportunities for the yards, ship operators, and technology assurance providers.
So it's not about implementing something and then creating another problem, but making sure this whole ecosystem works. Simon, Christina, Loic, we've come to the end of this panel discussion. We're almost out of time. So very quickly, I want, as closing remarks from each of you, what's the one priority that you would encourage the industry to take action on, to accelerate this energy transition? Loic, quick one.
Quick one.
Yeah.
I might surprise you because I'm not going to speak about hydrogen or wind or solar. I'm going to speak another topic, which is cooling.
Okay.
Because we speak a lot about decarbonization of the world, but decarbonization, it's global. We speak as well about global warming, right? And when it comes to global warming, cooling is a key topic. And I think it makes even more sense in a tropical country like here in Singapore to develop a real global expertise in cooling to contribute to more sustainable buildings, district cooling, data centers, with multiple applications. And if you take a look back, I think the energy demand from cooling has been multiplied by 7.5 in Asia for the last 30 years, and we expect 200% growth. So, I mean, that's a topic we need to investigate all together, according to me.
Thank you, Loic. Christina?
Yes, it would be to work together, collaborate, and start now so that we can stop global warming and we can achieve the climate goals of Paris climate goals. And we have a better future for the generations to come.
And to get to that ecosystem that you were talking about, am I right? Simon?
Okay, I'd like to add that as responsible organizations, I think the first priority for us is to actually decarbonize ourselves first in our production process. When you decarbonize yourself, you start to use, say, for example, solar as an energy power, you electrify all your mobile assets. This will collectively drive the demand side for more green energy. And that demand will actually motivate technology providers for technology development, and at the same time drive the cost down because of economy of scale. From supply side, meaning as a shipyard that supply sustainable product solutions, what we should do is to collaborate together with all the different partners within the chain to focus on reducing the levelized cost of energy, to bring it as close as possible to the conventional fuel now. The solar is quite close, offshore wind is coming closer, and then the future fuel, we need to do that. Also, at the same time, I also like to add on to what Krista mentioned, safety, very important.
Safety.
Without the safety, none of the fuel will be able to be deployed in urbanized city like ourselves. And also at the same time, I want to reiterate my earlier point about total carbon footprint and total environmental footprint, not just carbon. I think that is very, very important.
Wise words of wisdom from each of you today. Thank you so much, Simon, Christina, and Loic, for your wonderful sharing, and also for highlighting how, as a region, Southeast Asia can take specific steps to ensure energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. We've come to the end of the conference, but before we let you go, some closing remarks from the country chair of Singapore at DNV, Brice de Gallo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you very much for spending this afternoon with us. Let me conclude with a few thoughts about what we learned today. So number one, the energy transition is going to bring quite a lot of changes in this part of the world in the next 30 years. Gas will continue to increase and will play a crucial role in the energy transition in this part of the world. There's going to be massive electrification, and that will lead to strong growth in solar PV and wind. And then renewables development will expand offshore. So as I said, a lot of change, and we need to get ready for it. Second point is Singapore's energy journey shows that how government can play an important role in accelerating the transition. Market forces alone will not always be sufficient to accelerate the pace. So it's really key that the governments in the region invest in new technologies, focusing on further expansion of renewables, focusing on power grid expansion and making sure that they're future fit, focusing on decarbonization of existing assets. And you've understood it's all about integration, focusing on sector coupling. And finally, and I think it was very clear today, in a cross-sector collaboration and partnership across the value chain will definitely be a good enabler to accelerate the transition. So before I close, I'd like to thank our speakers and our panelists. I'd like also to thank our partners, Seas and Sue, for their support. And I will make sure that I don't forget all the people involved in the organization of this event. Thank you very much for all the hard work to make this event possible. I hope you enjoyed this afternoon with us, and I really hope that it has inspired many of you to carry on this very important journey. Thank you very much.
Brice de Gallo, the country chairman for Singapore at DNV. Thank you so much, Brice, for that succinct conclusion. If you haven't tried it yet, do stay tuned. Do check out the networking function of our event platform today. And once again, we would like to extend our thanks to the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore and the Singapore International Energy Week for all their support. And if you've missed any of the content or would like to rewatch some of our panels, a copy of the recording will be made available to you on demand after the event. We also hope that you've gleaned some key takeaways from our conference today and that you leave with a deeper understanding of the urgency of the energy transition and the steps that we can take moving forward to accelerate the energy transition here in Southeast Asia. My name is Yvonne Chan. On behalf of DNV, we wish you a great rest of the week. Stay safe and goodbye.